Hello everybody, my name is Megan and I decided to do my presentation on the Native American occupation of Alcatraz in 1969. So what sparked my interest was while reading the novel There by Tommy Orange in our Intro to Native American Literature class. He included the experiences of 12-year-old Opal Bear Shield on Alcatraz when she and her family were on the island in 1970. And I was very interested in this occupation from the start because Tommy Orange decided to focus more on Opal's innocent perspective rather than the actual event itself. And I wanted to learn more about this occupation because it seemed like it was a very major historical event that I had never learned in my previous history classes. My only knowledge of the island of Alcatraz was that it once was the prison for Al Capone and other famous gangsters. So the fact that there was this very important Native American occupation that I had never learned about seemed so fascinating to me. And this is a photo of the cover of There and Tommy Orange himself. So the literary connection from the novel There is that in the first chapter that is titled Opal, Viola, Victoria, Bear Shield, Opal discusses her perspective of the occupation as a young, naive girl who kind of doesn't really understand the meaning behind why she's on the island. So, in the scene, Opal and her older sister Jackie are eating food on the island when they first arrive. And the scene says, "I don't know about you," I said to Jackie, my mouth full of bread and butter, "but I could live like this." We laughed and Jackie leaned into me. We accidentally knocked heads, which made us laugh more. This scene taught me that in the beginning, the island had good food, resources, lots of support, and everybody was pretty happy to be there. However, it started to go downhill from there. There was a lot of drug use and alcohol use and a lot of messing around from some of the teenagers. Especially with Opal's older sister Jackie, she ends up being raped and getting pregnant by another teenager named Harvey. And Opal's mom told Opal that she was diagnosed with cancer while she was on the island, and she ends up dying from it soon after the return, months later. Now, Tommy Orange wanted to focus a lot more on how Opal is handling all these traumatic events happening around her. However, he kind of glossed over the actual historical event itself and glossed over other people's perspectives from the occupation. So my question was, what were the original historical intentions of this protest, and how did it not live up to its expectations? And in this photo is many Native Americans standing in front of the signs that they had just graffitied. So what were the inspirations for the occupation? Well, it starts with the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which stated that any unused government land could be taken back and used by the Native American tribes. There was also the termination policy of 1953, which many tribes were terminated and federal responsibility was turned over to state governments, so a large quantity of tribal land would no longer be protected under the government. One of the major turning points was when, in the fall of 1969, the San Francisco Native American Educational and Resource Center burned down, and so they needed a new place to put that. And since the island of Alcatraz was no longer being used as a prison, it seemed like the perfect place, especially since there was already occupation attempts in 1964 by Belva Caudier and Richard Mackenzie. Although their attempt was much less successful, it definitely inspired this major occupation in 1969. And this is a photo of the termination policy being signed. So the actual occupation started on November 20th, 1969, and it consisted of over 70 Native Americans from many different tribes, and they called themselves the Indians of all tribes. It was led mainly by Adam Norval of the Ojibwe tribe and Richard Oakes of the Mohawk tribe. And what was very interesting to me was that many of the Native Americans on Alcatraz were actually college-age students, like myself and many of you. And I found that so fascinating that people so young could make such a huge difference in the Native American community. So in this photo right here, we can see many Native American people just eating and smoking and just having a very casual time. However, on the right is many of the Native Americans lined up in one of the Alcatraz prisons. So the downfall started when Richard Oakes' daughter fell down a stairwell and died just a couple days after. So Oakes had to leave the island, which was really bad because he was one of the most important figures in this protest. So after his departure, there began to be a lack of resources and much more disorganization. There was also a lack of support from the Nixon administration. So finally, in June of 1971, the U.S. Marshals removed the last of the protesters, and there were about 15 still on the island. So this photo was taken when the U.S. Marshals were removing the last of the protesters. And even though the removal of the last of the protesters was probably difficult because it's not how people wanted the occupation to end, they are still holding up strong and they are still proud that they were able to occupy the island and fight for what they believe in. So after the end of the 19 months, people did not expect the outcome to be very good because of how the removal went. But there are actually some very positive long-term effects of the protest. For example, Nixon was pressured by his administration and by the public to end the termination policy, but he also signed 22 other pieces of legislation relating to expanding Native American sovereignty. And this past summer in 2021 marked the 50-year anniversary of the end of the occupation. And so the Golden Gate National Recreation Area was able to make a large exhibition about the occupation on Alcatraz for everyone to come and visit. The National Park Services are also thinking about creating a permanent Native American center on the island. And in this photo, this sign was vandalized back during the occupation and can still be seen on the island today. And if you're interested in looking up more information, these are the sources that I used. So thank you so much for listening.